Once again, welcome to the Nassau County Legislature. Today is the second of 3 hearings on the 2017 proposed budget. Last week we heard from the administration, the county controller, the Departments of Social Services and Human Services, and the Taxi and Museum Commission. Today we changed gears a little, and we will hear from the Police Department, the Sheriff, the Office of Minority Affairs, the Commissioner of Investigations, the Director of Procurement Compliance, and the Department of Public Works. The Office of Minority Affairs was originally scheduled to present last week, but due to accommodate the schedule of the interim Executive Director, we have moved them to today. We appreciate the time of each presenter and look forward to gaining insight into the budget of each department presented. Today's hearing should assist us in finalizing the 2017 budget. And we must remember that this is a budget hearing and questions should be directed to the department regarding their budget. And that would be the protocol for today. So first up today will be the Police Department, Acting Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Legislator.
See if it's on. Is it on?
Yeah, the top one.
Thank you, Legislator Gonzalez. With me today is Lieutenant Greg Stefanoff, Commanding Officer of the Personnel Accounting Bureau, and Assistant Commissioner for Legal Affairs and Compliance, Tatum Fox. Before we started, we actually handed out a number of handouts. Each should have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, Department's new use of force policy, the Lions Pride, which is just the current newsletter to the membership, and a breakdown of summonses and violations for the moving tickets. Currently, the parking tickets is a manual system, so we're not able to produce this report without going through 40,000 summonses and manually tabulate them. So we did provide a complete breakdown of all the PTL violations for last year and this year through September. With that being said, this year's budget is an increase of $50 million, being increased from $833.2 million to $883.4 million. On the revenue side, the increases are attributable predominantly to an increase in alarm permit fees and fines, which is about $2 million, investment income, which is a immaterial $5,000, a new tow truck impound program, which is $1 million, and a public safety fee that is increased from 0 to $64 million. So with that being said, that is the parking meters is going from $60,000 to $140,000, and that's just attributable to increases to revenue that we've been seeing. The budget for expense side, and this is the cumulative budget between district and headquarters as was the revenue, is an increase of, again, $833 million to $883 million. So that's attributable to an increase in terminal leave on the district side of $8 million, new hires sworn of $3.9 million. We are realizing a decrease in longevity of $1.1 million, and police service aid increases on the district side of $588,000. Additionally, on the OTPS, there are increases of about $676,000 for motor vehicle supplies, clothing and uniforms of $200,000, miscellaneous supplies of $560,000, and an increase in contractual of $586,000. Additionally, we're seeing a significant increase on retirement in the district of $4.3 million, health insurance of $1.2, and retirees of health insurance of $3.1 million. Miscellaneous fringe, $233,000 increase. On the headquarters side, there's an increase of $3.2 million attributable to detectives, And new hires is an increase of $8.7 million, with terminal leave on the headquarters side being reduced by 3.9. And then that's just more of a balance. So what you're seeing is a net increase of about a little over $5 million on the terminal leave. Police medic coordinators, we have additional employees in that title, and that's increased by about $600,000. Police communication operators will increase in the budgeted headline, and that's attributable of $850,000. We're seeing a reduction of longevity on that side of $875,000. And within the OTPS increases and equipment, it's a total increase of about $824,000. On the fringe, we're seeing increases of $12,700,000, with $6.3 attributable to retirement, $1.6 attributable to health insurance, and just about $4 million to retiree health insurance. Again, this lane's fringe is being increased by $854,000. This is what it looks like when the rubber meets the road. If you'll notice, currently the budgeted headcount, 2016 adopted budgeted headcount is 3,606 employees, with 2,350 sworn and 1,245 CSEA ordinance of 11. The budgeted increase is going to 3,820. So a 214-person increase to the headcount, and that is increasing the sworn headcount by 150 from 2,350 to 2,500, and increasing the CSEA headcount from 1,245 to 1,308, and the ordinance headcount from 11 to 12. This is a question that was asked by some of the legislators, was a breakdown of overtime, year-to-date total hours. This is through the end of, this is through September 1st. Total overtime hours is 692,000. And as you'll notice, the overtime hours ranged from 559,000 hours to 885,000 hours over the last, 909,000 hours over the last, since 2009. Just the bar graph, again, if you look at the bar graph, in 2009, we started the year at 2574, and we ended up, I believe that year we went up to about 2750, and as you'll notice, the sworn head count in 2014 was at the lowest level it's been in probably 35, 40 years, if not longer, and that was 2082. Currently, in 2015, it went to 2243. And in 2016, it went to 2356, where we're currently the budgeted headcount. Item of note there is we're currently at just around 2450, so we are over the budgeted headcount in that respect. We do have 150 recruits in the academy, so the actual operating strength of the department sworn is 2,300. That class is graduating in the first or second week of January, just around the date they set. Overtime drivers, this has been a topic of significant discussion, and what causes those overtime numbers. So what really generates the vast majority of the overtime, and if you look at us compared to Suffolk County, which are very similar departments, is the contractually mandated light roll call and the spin-offs of that contractually mandated light roll call. So in essence, what happens is where, give you an example, we had the Verizon strike this year, and Suffolk County had the Verizon strike. Suffolk County was able to police that strike without any impact on the bottom line. They were able to use existing resources that were working by pulling cars and sending those cars to cover the strikes. On the other hand, here in Nassau County, we're not permitted to do that to the work rules. So we spent several $100,000 in order to provide for the security and safety of the residents, both the strikers and the employees in that particular detail. In Suffolk County, they provided cops. In Nassau County, they provided cops. But due to the difference in work rules, here in Nassau County, we have to use overtime to do that. So that's the one item. The other item is, if you look at 2009, you look at that overtime, and there's a significant less hours in that. But to give you an example, there's been a number of contractual changes. The most biggest impacting change was that related to quarter days. At that point in time, there was a period where they started to rotate out of those quarter days where they were no longer providing them. What that did was, that created a situation where prior to the elimination of that contractual provision, every police officer, every DI member, every SOA member had to work 4 quarter days a year. That was 48 hours a year. And when you had 2,700 police officers, that alone accounts for over 100,000 hours of overtime offset. And that's what those quarter days were used for. They were used for overtime offset. So there's been a lot of contractual changes over the years that makes it more and more difficult, and the contracts become more and more restrictive. And then you take into consideration some of the other changes where the unions got additional minimum staffing levels where those numbers have increased. This year, we have seen an unprecedented level of terrorist activity in this country. Every time that occurs, every time there's a direct assault on police officers, we adjust our resources, and with that comes a price. You know, obviously, the first priority of this department, first priority of the county executive is to ensure the safety and security of the residents of Nassau County and the visitors. So you have the terrorism with a number of events, and I don't think a month goes by where there isn't a terrorist event somewhere. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And that all impacts the overtime. Some other items is the hiring. You know, it's quite obvious we're hiring at a pace and have hired more police officers in the last 2 years since May of 2014 than at least the last 30 years here in the Nassau County Police Department. That hiring is, there's a lot of residual costs from overtime. And again, a lot of that goes to contracts and a lot of that goes to having to hire. And to give you some examples, the applicant investigation unit this year has close to 10,000 hours of overtime in that unit to get those classes ready and get them on board. The police academy, direct overtime in the police academy year to date is 15,000 hours. And right now they're doing what's called the road show. And that's where it really starts to ramp up in the course because of the staffing that you have to add to deal with that road show. What is the road show? Well, that's role play where you have a high teacher to student ratio. That's the range, another thing, where every single 2 police officers that are shooting on a range line that's a recruit has an instructor, and then you have supervisors. So we have to maintain a very high level of staffing for their training. You have the emergency vehicle operators course, you have role play, you have simulations. They're all very labor intensive. Additionally, when you actually put those recruits out to the state mandated field training program, which I would not change even if the state didn't have the mandate, we are put in a position where we have to train those field training officers. Every field training officer gets about 40 hours of training. Because of the turnover this department has experienced over the last several years, we had to train a whole new cadre of field training officers. We're doing another class for this class coming up, and that's another 50 officers. What does that mean? Well, that alone is approximately 10,000 hours of overtime, because when we take those people off of patrol, we got to backfill their spots on patrol. So you're talking about $1 million. And let's not forget about the fact that the presidential candidates seem to love to come to Nassau County. You know, the best thing, you know, for my bottom line in overtime, if I don't see another presidential candidate for the rest of the year. And hopefully the president doesn't come to Nassau County either, and then I can save some money. To put this in perspective, the overtime bill for the presidential debate, everybody's waiting, huh? For the police department, and remember there was other departments, DPW, OEM, that were all involved. Just the police department's overtime bill was $1 million. So the total cost for the budget was about $250,000, $300,000 in straight time for the police department. And it was another $200,000 in additional equipment. Some of that equipment was purchased with asset forfeiture, some of it was purchased with grants, but that equipment was purchased. So that was, you know, total cost to the county was about $1.5 million. Again, $1 million of that was overtime. So we had 2 rallies with Donald Trump came into town, numerous other presidential visits and town hall meetings. Kasich was here, Hillary Clinton's been here a number of times, Bill Clinton has been here. Every time they come in, that comes with a price, whether that's a motorcade, whether that is security, whatever it is, dignitary protection, assets, that all comes with a price when they come into this county. So if you add it all up, the overtime bill this year for those presidential visits and candidate visits is north of $1.5 million. And again, what I will say is the police officers here have done a great job, and really, we did not have the problems here that a lot of other jurisdictions had, and that's a tribute to the men and women of the Nassau County Police Department. Crime in Nassau County. Well, this sums it up. If you look at this dates back to 1966, and what you're looking at is a UCR index, Uniform Crime Reporting Index. And you look at where we are over the last several years, and we are at the lowest level, by a significant percentage since we started capturing the UCR index. And what is the UCR index? The UCR index is outlined by the Department of Justice and provides a baseline where all municipalities can compare themselves to themselves on a year-on-year basis. But every single police department in the country reports it, so it allows us to compare us to all the jurisdictions in this country. This is a snapshot over the last 5 years of the UCR index. If you'll notice, this is through 2015. 16,825 was the number in 2009. In 2015, we finished at 12,682, or a 25% reduction in the UCR index. Some of the items that were asked for by the legislators last week was a breakdown of the crime. So the next slide is a breakdown. We look at crime 3 ways, and we look a lot more than that, and we'll talk about another way shortly. But the 3 major categories of crime that we look at are, we look at major crime. These are crimes that we believe we can impact by normal police operations. The second is the UCR index, again, and the third is the total crime reported in Nassau County. So if you look at the numbers, in 2009, the number was 7,830 for the major crime. In 2015, totaled 6,303, for just over a 20% reduction over the last 5 years in the major crime. The UCR index we already talked about, we've seen a 25% reduction. And the total crime, we went from 35,920 to 26,569, or an estimated 27% reduction. Some items of interest, and we'll talk about some other items momentarily. Some items of interest were, when you look at the grand larceny of vehicles, stolen vehicles. In 2009, there were 912, and last year, there was a total of 563. Robberies, commercial, kind of an interesting number there. It hasn't decreased that much, but what you should be aware of, that 25% of those are shoplifters that gone bad. Somebody goes in and shoplifts, and they in turn, they resist their arrest by store security. Those cases are frequently, not in the same vein as normal commercial robberies. But take a look at robberies other. Those are all the robberies. Those are pedestrian robberies. Those are home invasions. In 2009, we were at 516, and this year, we finished 2015 at 343, and we're actually going to a number of that will be slightly down. So crime is heading in the right direction. I don't think there's any way that you really criticize the work that the men and women in the department are doing. This is where we are at today, actually 10/11, and I believe we have we got the slide of that. So if you take a look at it, murder is down from 9 to 5, 44%. That number for us is a very small number. And in New York State, the per capita murder index for the state is to about 3.5, 3.6%, with the 3.5, 3.6, not percent. For every 100,000 people in jurisdiction, 3.5 to 3.6 will be murdered. Here in Nassau County, it's actually 0.6 per 100,000. So anywhere in New York State as a whole, you're 6 times more likely to be murdered than here in Nassau County. And Again, I'm going to make this very clear. These are the police district numbers. These are the areas that we have patrol responsibility for. We do not capture the villages, but what I will tell you is when we add the villages in, over the last 6 years, the numbers even get better. So it's actually the most conservative view in how we're looking at crime here in Nassau County. And these are the areas that we have primary patrol responsibility, the police district, if you would. One of the items I do want to talk about, and I'll talk about it momentarily, is burglaries. But as you can see, we're currently 6.88% down. Stolen vehicles are slightly up. And burglary residents is down 7.35. Commercial burglary is up 0.31%, or 1 burglary. You know, there's a lot going on in this country right now, and if you talk to the major city chiefs, which we'll be talking about this tomorrow, there's a lot of cities that are, and by cities I mean large police departments, we are one of those large police departments, that are struggling with violent crime. And by struggling, they are seeing significant spikes in violent crime. And I'm not talking spikes to the 1994 era yet, but you are seeing significant increases in crime. Chicago right now has the highest murder rate that it's had in 20 years. And that's just one example. There are countless other examples. Probably more than half the major cities in this country, the 75 major city police departments in this country, are experiencing it. Here in Nassau County, we're not. Violent crime, year to date, is 671 versus 712, so we're seeing a slight reduction. And firearms-related crime, we're seeing also a reduction from 114 to 107. Also, please keep in mind that we have a very low crime rate to begin with, so just pushing it down at all is a big win. As we move forward this year, and as we move forward into next year, the focus of the Nassau County Police Department is crime, heroin, traffic safety, aggressively managed overtime, and homeland security. One of the things that we did in January this year is we started the burglary task force. Those might remember that earlier this year, in May of this year, the Nassau County Police Department was realizing this spike in burglaries. I didn't see anybody else coming out when burglaries are now down 7.5% in residential burglaries. And one of the major reasons for that is the burglary task force. We started that burglary task force in January, and at this point in time, the burglary task force has closed 15 burglary patterns and charged those individuals, 15 people arrested, with 77 burglaries. We suspect that those individuals are responsible for hundreds of burglaries. So here they are. As recently as yesterday, the burglary pattern team closed out a countywide commercial burglary rooftop pattern. This single individual was charged with 12 burglaries in a pattern that had 13 burglaries. Additionally, we believe this person, since he got out of jail, he's on parole, last summer, is responsible, and we suspect is responsible, for probably over 50 burglaries. So hopefully we won't be seeing him for the next several years. Again, this was an arrest just made in the last day or two by the burglary task force. The single biggest problem we have here in Nassau County is heroin and the opioids. It is reaching epidemic proportions. It is the biggest challenge that we have, and it's not a police challenge, it's not a Department of Health challenge, it's a government challenge. Here in Nassau County, we're leading the way. In 2014, Nassau County Police Department was awarded the Cisco IECP, International Chiefs of Police Award for our heroin initiative. Unfortunately, as you can see from this graph, the total opioid overdoses in 2004 was 52. In 2015, that number rose to 222. Heroin was 24, and last year was 66 heroin overdoses. I would like to think we're winning, but we're not. Narcan Think about this. I just pointed out 222 people died last year. And thanks to the great work of the Nassau County Police Department, thanks to the great work of the cops and AMTs of this department, 278 lives were saved. So think where would we be if not for Narcan being in the hands of all of our cops. Again, 207 lives saved in 2014. But now look at where we're at in 2016. As of today, 309 people have their lives saved by Narcan. So there's a lot more work to do, and this is a challenge. In the last year and a half, we continue to adjust our program. There's a countywide heroin task force. District Attorney sits on it, members of my Department of Health, all the stakeholders, and it's chaired by the County Executive and the District Attorney. And the department's focus is education, awareness, intervention, and enforcement. The two new items since 2014 is the intervention. What we did in 2014 in the Nassau County Police Department, we were the first major police department to train each and every police officer in the department in the administration of Narcan. And it's having an impact in saving lives. But unfortunately, what we found was there were occasions where we'd be in the same house 2 or 3 times, given Narcan. We had one case in 2015 where we administered Narcan during the weekend. We were back on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and we were back a third time at the end of the week where they died of an overdose. So what's happening? We administered Narcan, we transport them to the hospital, and before the cops finish their paperwork, call their area case, and get back on patrol, the individual who just overdosed, and if not for Narcan would have died, is back on the street. So what we realized was we had to find a way to, do a treatment referral. In a perfect world, New York State would pass a law that requires that these people that overdose are held for 24, 48 hours, so they get social workers and get the treatment referrals before they leave the hospital. But that doesn't happen. So what we did was we looked at the law. Unfortunately, the way the law is structured, the police department could not refer anybody to a drug treatment program. So after discussions in the county through Department of Health, Drugs and Alcohol, what we're able to do is we're able to refer all these cases to the Drugs and Alcohol and the Department of Health. And they're able, under their charter and their authority, they can make those referrals. So that's what we're doing now. And hopefully this year's numbers are better than last year's numbers, but I will tell you that the toxicology reports that come back from the ME's office they lag behind several months. So we really don't know, what the final numbers are going to look like. And again, we classify those cases to track to see what's going on, but they're not final numbers and they're not based on blood, they're based on the evidence at the scene.